had. Call me.
Yes. At 12, there's a meeting for a dual enrollment going to.
Are they going to call for you?
I don't know. What time is supposed to be at 12?
At 12. All right, you slip out at 58. If they don't call for you, you just slip on out at 58, and we'll be good with it. Today is a special day on the calendar, or at least a memorial type day on the calendar for me personally. And what I'm going to give to you is my personal story and how I've experienced world history. So world history class, that makes sense, right? Maybe remember back to very first day of class, I think our very first assignment was, and some of you were like, very first assignment was, how have you made world history? I've been thinking about that, and I think in the future I'll change that phrasing to how have you experienced world history. So the story I'm going to tell you today, I understand, how about made world history? Most of you said COVID, right? You've come through COVID. Maybe some family members have an elected official in your family, so your family has participated in politics, something like that. But I think a better way to say it, something that 14, 15, 16-year-olds can understand a little bit better, is how I experience world history. And what I'm going to tell you today is how I have experienced world history. So one, it's part of my family's story. And two, I'll tell you, last time I told this story was 2 years ago. I skipped last year just based on the class calendar. So I told this story 2 years ago. And when I got done telling it, one of the students said to me, how come no one's ever told you that before? What I'm going to tell you is something that's very near and dear to my heart, my family in Oklahoma. But as time has gone on, we swear to ourselves we will never forget. Right? I mean, in the event, following an event, especially a tragedy, we will never forget. But what I'm going to tell you is that we kind of have. And I would imagine that your age bracket, especially in Georgia, now it might be different if you're growing up in Oklahoma, but especially in Georgia, you probably have never heard of what I'm about to tell you about today. I'm going to tell you about April 19th, 1995, one of the days that shaped America. And what happened on that day is the Oklahoma City bombing of the federal building in Oklahoma City. April 19th, that's today, 1995, but I'm going to take you back to 1995 and tell you about one of the days that shaped America. So it started, and if you have questions along the way, I'm happy to entertain them. But for the most part, I am just going to I got a lot of pictures for the day, and I'm going to tell you the story. If you got questions along the way, I'm happy to answer them. But hopefully we'll arrive at the end, just like the student from 2 years ago. You're like, man, I've never heard of that before, but I'm glad someone told me about it, because there's a very important takeaway from the event as well. April 19th, 1995. Let me take you to 9:01. 9:01 is a literal time on the clock, but it's also symbolic in Oklahoma City for life before the bombing. 9:01 on a Tuesday morning is a normal day, right? Today's Wednesday on the week, but it was a Tuesday back then. Normal day. People going to work. Hustle bustle of a city. I know we don't live in a city, but just imagine the hustle bustle of a city. People are dropping their kids off at daycare. They're getting to that first meeting. A lot of times in the adult world, 9 o'clock is when the first meetings happen. So just imagine 9 o'clock, 9:01, people coming in with their coffee, maybe just a minute late, sit down, ready to take some notes. The day is starting. 9:01 represents life before the bomb. This is a picture of the Oklahoma City National Memorial, and I'm going to give you the whole vista, the whole view of the memorial. But this is one of the gates at the memorial. It says 9:01 because 9:01 represents life before the bombing. So got a couple of placeholders for videos. This is going to be video number 1. What you're going to hear, my good little historians, this is primary source audio of a very, I would say, not exciting business meeting. This is a meeting of the Oklahoma Water Resources Board, boring, and they're hearing about a farmer disputing his boundary line, who actually has rights to the water. Not super exciting, the meeting itself. But this is at 9:01, and I'm going to tell you that life changes at 9:02. Let's hear how life changes at 9:02.
So whether to approve or deny the application, so they're the decision makers. And they'll receive a copy of my proposed recommendation and can attend that board meeting and present your information directly to them. With regard to this proceeding, basically, there are 4 elements that I have to receive information regarding.
I can see, it looks like part of the building has been blown away. We'll have to background the other side so I can get a better view of it. The explosion went off around 9 a.m. and we could feel the explosion in the newsroom of Channel 9, at least 5 miles from downtown.
As the chopper goes around the side of the federal building, look at that shot. It is absolutely incredible. The side of the federal building has been blown off, Jesse.
About a third of the building has been blown away. This is just devastating.
What did they do? So what you heard, I'll tell you all the details. What you heard was the car bomb going off at 9:02 a.m. and life changing forever. In Oklahoma City for sure, but also nationwide. There was certainly a nationwide response, and I understand as we get farther away from 1995, fewer people have heard the story, which is why, me as a historian, why I tell you the story. It's personal to me, and I want you to understand the story. So you heard the bomb go off, you heard the chaos thereafter, and then the video footage you started to see was the first response from the helicopter, the television helicopters, at about 9:08. 9:08, as best I remember, that's about how fast they were able to get live video footage going. This was 9:02. 9:01 life before, 9:02 life has changed forever, and 9:03 is life after. So I'm going to tell you the story of 9:02 and 9:03 life after. This is the Swansons in April of 1995. David and Joel, and my mother was pregnant with my youngest brother, Luke. This is April 16th. 1995. This is actually Easter Sunday, about 2 weeks before. So as I asked my parents for some pictures, these were the pictures they were able to give me from that time frame. Mom and the boys, dad and the boys, happy family. 1995, I was in first grade. My brother is 5 years younger than that, so he wasn't even in school yet. This is the Swansons. This is your average family living in suburban Oklahoma City in 1995. Well, my parents' story, my personal story for my family, is that in the moment you just heard on audio, my mom was on the phone with my dad. And on that day, they were going to go for the 12-week ultrasound for my youngest brother. 12 weeks is when you generally find out the gender. So it was going to be the exciting gender reveal ultrasound for my youngest brother. So they're on the phone with each other, and you have to try to understand. It wasn't cell phones. It wasn't text messaging. It wasn't Wi-Fi. It was a landline phone. Yeah, it was a landline phone. And my mom was on the phone with my dad at 9:02. I'm home because I'm going to go to the ultrasound as well. So normally would have been in school, but I was at the house when this happened. At 9:02 a.m., she hears the blast. She hears the blast because she's on the phone, and the blast comes through the phone. And without context, without understanding anything else, she doesn't know what she just heard. All that she knows is my dad's no longer on the other end of the line. She stays on the line because the line was still alive. So she stays on the line, and she starts to hear very similar screaming, crying. She hears my dad's voice in the background, so she can know he's at least alive, but his voice is very chaotic. And he's shouting, Julie, where's Julie? Which was the secretary of their office. And everyone's scrambling. Everyone's trying to figure out what has happened. Now, my mom stays on the line. My dad was 2 blocks south. Oh, that's important context. My dad was 2 blocks south, and even so, this story, the audio and the chaos was ensuing. And I'm going to show you a variety of pictures here in the next couple minutes. My dad was 2 blocks south. At the time, he was the press secretary for a local congressman. The congressman who represents Oklahoma City, he was on his staff. And my dad, I know you guys know my dad. My dad was, Mr. Cool Guy in this era, right? He was like chief executive, Mr. Cool Guy. He was talking on the phone with his feet propped up on his desk. So I'll just do it here. He was in his chair, talking on the phone with his feet propped up on his desk. And the blast comes from behind him, and the inertia of the blast pushes him across his desk, all the way across his office, probably about this distance right there, and he crashes into the far side of the wall. So that's his moment of 9:02. My mom's moment of 9:02, she stays on the line, and she's going to stay on the line. She's not going to hang up, right? Until 8 minutes later. It's one of those things that you never forget. 8 minutes later, call waiting beeps in, which you guys just have to understand. That's like your iPhone saying you're getting another call. Call waiting was just beep, beep. And it meant that someone else was trying to call your line as well. So what you had to do was, I think you would hit 0 and it would punch you over to the other line. My dad had found another phone and he was able to call the house, and the call waiting, beep, beep, My mom punched over to the other line, and it was him. And he says, Carol, I don't know what just happened. There's been an explosion of some sort. I got to get stuff figured out, and I'll call you when I can. Like, that was the best we had. No text messages to stay in touch with. No FaceTime to figure out, like, this. No. These days, we send pictures of our food, right? Like, oh, look what I'm eating right now. No way to send a picture to describe what was going on. It was just an explosion went off, and I got to figure some stuff out. And we will, and I'll call you when I can. I distinctly remember my part of the story. I distinctly remember my youngest brother, Joel. He was in the living room watching the Muppets show. Why you remember certain details like that, I don't know, right? But I specifically remember he was watching the Muppets show. It's very ironic. He still loves Kermit and Miss Piggy to this day. And I got called in. My mom called me in and told me something bad has happened in your dad's work. Let's go turn on the TV and see if we can see it. So that is where we entered the images that you saw on the screen, the helicopter images. And I think they did that clip very well. The helicopter came from the non-blast side. And obviously you can see the smoking and you know something's going on. But it went from the non-blast side to the blast side, and it showed that about a third of the building had been blown away. This is the imagery that we started to see on the television. About a third of the building had been blown away. This right here, the corner of this building right here, is where my dad was. His office was on the outside of this street right here. So his window pane was on the outside of this street right here, the building with the red roof. And like I said, this is south. So the picture's a little upside down, if you will. This is south. He was 2 blocks south of the building. So this is still in Oklahoma City today. I'm going to tell you how the city has recovered, but this is a place that you could go and visit today. And it is kind of a really special place to my family personally, because we can kind of walk where my dad was to how close the building was, and we can kind of start to get a feel for how chaotic that day was along the way. Again, a little bit different angle, but that red circle is about where my dad's office was on that day. This is a bit of an overview of the building. So, Jasmine, you asked, what was that, how? I'm going to tell you about the bad guys here in a second. What it was a truck bomb. It was a Ryder moving van. So like U-Haul, but Ryder, Ryder is the yellow brand. A Ryder moving van full of fertilizer and racing fuel. It was a homemade bomb. Okay? It was not a military bomb. It was a homemade bomb. And the truck parked right in front of the building right here. And this becomes a crater, down and out, a large crater. And of course, the bomb took out about a third of the whole building as well. You can see that these are offices. Each of these square-like shapes, I guess several more pictures. Each of those square-like shapes was an office. Clearly, certain offices were decimated, right? And the individuals there wouldn't have had a chance to survive. And then there are many other survivors in the building, kind of the farther reaches of the building, and lots of stories of heroism when it comes to rescuing those people as well. 902. This is a clock that was in the building on that day. This is presently, there's the Oklahoma City National Memorial and Museum. So this clock rests in the museum today. And you can see that it's frozen in time at 9:02, the moment that the bomb went off. This is my dad's window. He took these pictures in 1995 with a film camera. So again, wow. Yeah, right. You can't just click with your iPhone. Like click in advance. But this is his window right here. And I'll tell you a little bit more about his story. This is his window pane right here. He was sitting down and his feet were on the desk. And really, reasonably speaking, he could have been the farthest out casualty, death, had that not happened. Now, inside the building, and I'm going to show you another statistic here in a second. Inside the blast radius, casualties, deaths happen from inside the building and right across the street, the other building. This is where deaths happened. Nobody died in these outside buildings. But if one small piece of chance or fate or God, however you want to say it, hadn't affected my dad, he could have possibly been killed even 2 blocks south. Here's that piece of information. See the window pane there? When the blast happened, the window pane pushed inward and really crushed onto his desk. Had he not been Mr. Cool Guy with his feet kicked up and been blown across the room, he may have been crushed sitting at his desk. So sometimes it's the small decisions, even like kicking your feet up on your desk, which of course you don't know that that's going to change your life, but it did. As it were, he flew across the room, and this is probably a silly picture to have in this series presentation. He flew across the room, and on the far side of his office, he had this poster of Cosmo Kramer. TV show? Anybody? You know what TV show this is?
It's done.
Huh? Seinfeld is correct. Thank you. One of you. Have you ever watched it? You have. Okay. One of you. Crushing it. Oh man, I got like 17 people at the door here. No, I will not lie for your class officer forms. Who else?
Here, just make this.
Put your name on it. I'll put your name on
Thank you.
it. Yep. When's it due?
Today.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Okay, thank you.
My 7th. My dad literally, and again, this is the only like laugh line in the story. A little bit of humor in the seriousness. He crashes into Cosmo Kramer. Like he flies across his desk, and on the other side of the office is this poster framed, and he crashes into Cosmo Kramer. And genuinely, literally, the only scratch he has on him is a small little scratch on his hand from the framed poster of Cosmo Kramer. So that is, and we had just given him this poster for Christmas. You know, he takes it, he puts it in his office. 4 months later, he crashes into it at the moment of the bombing. So just one little small detail makes it interesting. This is his window pane having crashed forward.
Wow.
And the Kramer poster is in there somewhere. You can see the window pane having crashed forward could have crushed his body, but he flew across the desk pane.
I just saw the monitor.
The monitor kind of dates the situation as well. A little bit of an infographic just to kind of illustrate, again, what we're talking about. So here's the blast crater. And Jasmine, you're kind of interested, and you asked what was it? It was 30 feet across and 8 feet deep from the Ryder truck. Here's a little bit of the outline of, you know, who was affected in the building, in the blast area. What's something that stands out to you?
Daycare center.
There's a daycare center on the 2nd floor. And the bomber knew it, and the bomber still picked this building as his target. And that kind of contributes to how heinous the crime was. He knew that there was a daycare center, and as such, there were 19 children who were killed in the blast as well. You see the other businesses affected. It was a federal building, okay? So the reason it was targeted is because it represented the government. It was someone who hated the government. We'll talk a little bit more about him in just a second. But a lot of federal agencies were in the building. So you got Social Security, Army, Air Force, and Marine recruiting, Veterans Department, Labor Department, Housing and Urban Development, Bureau of ATF, Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. A lot of different federal agencies were in the building, and that's kind of exactly what he wanted to target. He wanted to target the government. He wanted to make a point about hating the government, and we'll talk more about his motivation here in a second as well. Again, just kind of an illustration of the city. So this is the Murrah building. This was where my dad's building was, and you can see, how far out glass was shattered and structures were collapsed. Very large damage radius. More than just the single building itself, the Murrah building. And this is where casualties happened from inside the building. So red is a death. The number that we always remember in Oklahoma City is 168. 168 people died in the bombing. And you see the other colors there, wounded, admitted to the hospital, not injured, etc. So you can see that really from every corner of the building, there was death and destruction and wounding, depending on where people were inside the building. 9:03. So our bathroom break buzzer just went off. I don't tend to like to stop, but I will let us hit the bathroom break. And when we come back, we'll talk about life after. If you got any side questions, you can grab me during the bathroom break. Thank you for your attention today. I appreciate it.
So, was it like a kamikaze thing? Like, did the dude die or
No, he didn't. He ran away. I'll tell you about that. Yes. Yeah, Bianca. Just go. Hurry up. Seinfeld. I knew Coleman.
My dad watches it all the time.
Well, I knew Justin would be teaching you Seinfeld. I appreciate that about him. Still smells good in here.
You always just put it felt good.
No, put it back there. My dad.
I guess
that?
I'm just good to see you.
Can I say that?
You so weird.
Hey, do you need those? Do you have some? You need them?
I didn't know anything about it.
Let's go check it out. So you're in the class office category.
I did want to.
I'm almost
Where
so
is
sure.
Bianca, the office? All right, fam. So again, I know kind of giving you my personal story today. I appreciate your attentiveness. Let's carry on. 903. Now 903 is just 1 minute, right? I know, like 902 blends into 903, but metaphorically, symbolically, 903 is life after the bomb. And there's the horror. There's the horror of the moments after the bomb, but there's also the hope that came with rebuilding. So 903 is a big symbolism for life after the bombing. So let's walk through life after the bombing. Really, to get to 902 and 903, we actually got to go backwards. We got to go backwards to the siege at Waco. Does anybody know what happened at Waco, Texas?
Oh, no.
Is that
I was about to ask what
Okay,
year.
that's fine. So the siege at Waco was actually a lengthy siege by the federal government on a compound filled with religious separatists. That's probably the safest way to say it, best way to say it. Really a cult. They were a religious cult. They're called the Branch Davidians. They worshipped in their own way. They had their own beliefs. And guess what? You can do that in America. That's fine. But what you can't do is stockpile assault weapons inside your compound. Jasper's a great question. So why did they raid it? The reason they raided it is because this religious cult was stockpiling weapons and ammunition and bombs, because it wasn't just guns, it was munitions of many sorts. And the federal government caught wind of that. They actually had an inside agent, not to get too much into the story. Federal agent caught wind of the weapons at the Branch Davidian compound, and they surrounded it. At first, they tried to talk them out gently. There were women and children inside, and they didn't want to go in shooting. So at first, they tried to talk them out. They tried to talk the children out. They tried to talk the women out. They wanted to arrest the leader, but they didn't want to cause a problem. Well, the final assault at Waco, and this is after something like 50 plus days. The final assault at Waco was on April 19th, 1993. People who see, and Waco kind of divided the nation. There were those who agree with law and order, and those who saw that you can't start your own compound and stockpile weapons, and you can't just separate from society. But then there were also those who saw it as a great overreach by the federal government. Federal government probably went about it a little bit wrong, okay, I'll just say it like that, a little bit aggressively. They brought in armored vehicles, they brought in tanks. There's a grand question about how did the fire start. Some people think that the government started the fire. Some people think that the Branch Davidians started the fire. Either way, in the end, a lot of people die. A lot of people die inside the Branch Davidian compound. And to the watching world, a lot of people cast blame on the government. And some of those people are the people who are going to start planning the Oklahoma City bombing. I'm about to characterize for you who was responsible for the Oklahoma City bombing. But to understand what happens in 1995, we got to remember what happens in 1993. This is a baby step towards the hate that would lead to the Oklahoma City bombing. So it starts with Waco. Now, like a good historian, I'm going to do the 5 W's. I'm going to go over the who, and I'm going to start with the bad guys. And, it's not their story. I don't want to make it about them, but we can't understand the story without understanding them. So briefly, I'm going to characterize who are the bad guys. Here's the big three. These are the three who planned the Oklahoma City bombing. So who do we have here? These are three. These gentlemen right here. Oh, gentlemen's the wrong word. These three guys right here are Army buddies. They met in the Army. They trained in the same basic training platoon. The primary bomber is this man right here, Timothy McVeigh. On the day of the bombing, Timothy McVeigh was 27 years old. His counterpart, who was very involved in planning the bombing, is Terry Nichols. Terry Nichols is 40 years old, so 27, 40, and this is Michael Fortier. Michael Fortier is 33 years old. These are the three men who are most responsible, for carrying out the Oklahoma City bombing. They watched what was going on in Waco and got angry. They cast blame for Waco on the government. They were radicals who really believed that the government overreached and that the government should be punished. And the way they decided to punish the government, or at least get attention for their cause, was to bomb another federal building. And that federal building, they looked around. They looked for several different possible targets, and they decided that the federal building in Oklahoma City made for the best target. So they weren't out for Oklahoma City itself. Ooh, we hate Oklahoma City. It just so happened to be that there was a federal building in Oklahoma City, which in their mind gave them a good possible target, and that's why they chose it. Like I said, they met in the Army. So kind of interestingly, they crossed paths with a lot of things that I did in the Army as well. They met at Fort Benning. Fort Benning's in Georgia, Columbus, Georgia, on the Alabama border. I've been at Fort Benning. They also spent some time at Camp McCall, North Carolina. One of these fellas, Timothy McVeigh, the primary bomber, Timothy McVeigh was trying out for Army Special Forces. He did not pass. He did not pass the Special Forces selection process, but he was that mind. He wanted to be a Special Forces soldier. And I think that also kind of contributes to the, his failure contributes to the idea that he wanted to get back at the government. So to me, it's always been kind of harrowing, the fact that we crossed paths in the Army a little bit. Now, I wasn't in the same building with him at the same time, but my career path kind of took me to some of the same places that they were at, Fort Benning and Camp McCall, North Carolina. This is Timothy McVeigh in 1993. He actually gave an interview to a newspaper from a couple miles outside of the Waco compound. See, as the government was surrounding the compound in Waco, and there's lots of writing, lots of documentaries about Waco, there's stuff on Netflix, stuff on Hulu. If you're interested, you can go find out more. But a lot of people started to flock to the area, and what he's doing here, he's selling basically like anti-government bumper stickers. You can see ban guns, You see the communist and the fascist logo. I really can't read what it says here. This says, fear the government that fears your gun. Is that what it says? Fear the government that fears your gun. So he was pro-gun. He was anti-government. These are after his army days, even though he's wearing an army hat right there, right? Like, can't get rid of the uniform. He gives an interview to a newspaper. Nobody tags him as a future radical. Nobody tags him as a future bomber. But maybe they should have been paying a little bit better attention because he was clearly supporting the Branch Davidians and opposing the government. So very interesting in hindsight, very interesting to find this photograph and realize that he kind of already made a name for himself even years before the bombing. So that's the who. Those are the bad guys, rather. Those are the bad guys. And of course, they're going to continue to be involved in the story, as I tell you, how, the plot. So Jaspin, this gets to the question you asked earlier. What was it? How did they do it? Well, Timothy McVeigh in the military was an explosives expert. He knew how to use demolition. He knew how to use C4. He knew how to use TNT. It was what he studied. Like, it was what his job was in the Army, how to blow stuff up. Some people are going to criticize the Army for training people on how to blow stuff up, and then they use it on civilians. And I understand that. That's kind of a difficult thing. If I've trained you to do something, obviously, I hope I'm also trusting that you're not going to use it for ill. Timothy McVeigh devises this very simple truck bomb. By simple, I mean all the materials were available. All the materials you could just purchase on the market. You didn't have to have a prescription for it. You didn't have to have a demolitions license for it. You could just buy this stuff. So what it is fertilizer and racing fuel. He buys, like farm grade 55-gallon barrels of nitrate, which is basically fertilizer for a field, and racing fuel. By racing fuel, I mean like Formula One, dragsters. They use a special type of gasoline, not just your average gasoline. It's a little bit more flammable. So the fertilizer and the racing fuel, when ignited, creates a chemical reaction that essentially creates a bomb. This is a piece of evidence that basically points towards his guilt. This was just a piece of paper where he sketched. Tim drew this copy with Randy, I guess. He just sketches. This is the cab of the vehicle. Okay, this is where he's driving. But in the rear of the vehicle, this is how you stack the drums of nitro. This is where you put the racing fuel. This is where you put how many pounds of this, that, and the other. This was the bomb. This was the truck that was in front of the building, and he set a timer fuse. So Riker asked, was it a suicide type of a thing? Was he a kamikaze bomber? No, he set a timer, walked away, and he already had a getaway vehicle stashed as well. So he did survive the bomb. Of course, he is apprehended later, and I'll tell you that story. This was the building before destruction. So this spire right here, this whole thing is taken out by the bomb. If you think back to the picture of the destroyed building, this whole column is taken out. This is the front face of the building that is targeted and destroyed. As it is in this picture right here, the truck gets parked right about here, and then it takes out the whole front face of the building. Like I said, it's the federal building. It housed a lot of federal agencies, and that is basically exactly what Timothy McVeigh wanted to target, was all these various federal agencies. They reconned this location. Okay? They looked at places in Kansas City and Dallas and Oklahoma City, and they decided that this building was most suitable for what they wanted to do. This building had the easiest way to drive up. This building had the most people stacked to the front in terms of their offices. This building is the one they wanted to blow up. So it's very deliberate. It wasn't like they woke up and said, hey, let's go blow up the building. They had a plan, very premeditated, and when they put the plan into action, it was also very deadly. This is the truck. Now, that's not the very truck, but this is the type of truck that was used. Ryder Moving Company. Have we ever seen that? Have we ever seen a Ryder truck? U-Haul maybe a little bit more popular, U-Haul with the orange, but Ryder is just another brand of moving trucks. And of course, he rents this truck and never intends to return it. But that kind of becomes a big piece of the evidence along the way, that when he actually signed his name for renting the truck, well, you can track that back to who he rented the truck from, and you can find out, that, he was signed for this truck, which was used in the bomb. So that becomes a piece of the evidence along the way as well. And then finally, the getaway car. This is actually in the Oklahoma City National Memorial Museum. The actual getaway car that he used on that day has become an artifact in the museum. He had this car stashed about 2 blocks away. So back to it being premeditated, back to him having a plan. He knew that he was going to drive up, leave the truck right there. It was kind of like a place where businesses would receive their packages, and a lot of times the UPS man or the FedEx man, like they would park their truck right there. So it wasn't totally abnormal that a truck would be parked right there. So the plan was drive up, park the truck, light the igniter, and he knows that he had about 3 or 4 minutes before it would go off. And he briskly walked to his getaway car, which was this nasty old Mercury. Do I have it in my notes here? Getaway car. Yeah, 1977 Mercury Marquis. He already had it stashed. He stashed it days earlier. He had a note on the dashboard that says, ran out of gas, coming back. Please don't tow this car. He literally, 1995, right? I mean, he literally said that, please don't tow this car, which of course for him, it was his getaway car. And it worked. You know, the plan was still there. His car was still there when he needed it. This car becomes important a little bit later down the story as well. And of course, it finds its way into the museum today. A little bit more inside of his motivation. This is a book called The Turner Diaries. Anybody ever read it? Probably not. I haven't either. And I'll just kind of recommend that it's something you shouldn't read. The story of the Turner Diaries illustrates a group of white supremacist separatists who wage a war against the federal government. It was kind of a fictional account of what Timothy McVeigh hoped to do. See, he wasn't just bombing one building as his own act of terror.
Mr. Swanson, will you send Coleman Thomas to the media center, please?
On his way. He was hoping to incite a race war and a war against the federal government. He was hoping, and we know this from his journals, we know this from his correspondences, Timothy McVeigh was hoping to inspire more people to do copycat actions. He didn't want the Oklahoma City bombing to be the only one, which in the end it was, that's good. But he wanted other people to copycat and start a race war in America. He wanted to overthrow the federal government. And this is all written in this book called The Turner Diaries, which, you know, you can kind of get into the conversation about, should we ban books? Should this be in a high school library? It's a pretty radical book. And really, it inspired Timothy McVeigh to do a murderous action. So sometimes books can lead people to do wrong things. Probably a different conversation for a different day. This is an actual quote from the Turner Diaries. This is literally the opening quote, the opening scene from the book. We will then drive into the FBI building's freight receiving area, set the fuse, and leave the truck, which is exactly what he did. He drives into the federal building's freight receiving area, sets the fuse, and leaves the truck. So the book was a large inspiration for the actual attack he would do in real life. When? Kind of talk through the when of the event. So leads me right to, well, we'll watch another video here in just a second. I already told you 901 is life before, 902 is symbolic for the moment of the bomb, and then 903 is life after. So sequence of events. Here is some security camera footage of the Ryder truck arriving at the front of the building. Another amazing piece of evidence that just really puts it all together. We can see it's time-stamped April 19th, 8:57. This is when the Ryder truck arrived at the front of the building. This is this is what the Ryder truck actually did. This is what the bomb actually did. It makes a crater 30 feet wide. Wait, I thought it was like 13 feet across, and you know, as far down as 28 feet, 30 feet. Not reading my picture there very well. You can see how large, you can see how large the crater gets. You can see, you know, 11 inches of asphalt, 7 inches of concrete. Clearly, it did a lot of destruction in the moment that it went off as well. And these are the types of images that popped up on the news video, or popped up on news television about 8 minutes afterwards. The bomb was heard for dozens of miles away. The news stations themselves, which are not really super close to the epicenter, but the news stations heard something happen, and they said, hey, we need to get a chopper in the air. I don't know what that was, but we need to get a chopper in the air. So I'm gonna let us finish out kind of the video we started and the images that popped up on the screen, and you're gonna hear some interviews from people who were there, continuing to tell the story.
Whether to approve or deny the application, so they're the decision maker. And you'll receive a copy of my proposed recommendation and can attend that board meeting and present your information directly to them. With regard to this proceeding, basically, there are four elements that I have
Yes,
to
we're gonna hear the bomb again. It's fine.
receive information regarding. Everybody look together here. Now, that's what's missing on.
Come back and see. It looks like part of the building has been blown away. We'll have to background the other side so I can get a better view of it. The explosion that went off around 9 a.m. If we could feel the explosion in the newsroom of Channel 9, at least 5 miles from downtown.
As the chopper goes around the side of the federal building, look at that shot. It is absolutely incredible. The side of the federal building has been blown off, Jesse.
About a third of the building has been blown away. This is just devastating.
My back was to my window, and
My bad. Slightly out of order. It's good. All right. This is what I meant. We'll pick it up here.
That morning, I was not in my office. I was at a fundraiser about 30 miles away. We had a 9 o'clock start when all of a sudden my phone went off. And I was told that there'd been some type of an explosion at the Murrah building. The greatest fear I have is that we have casualties in the thousands. At any one time, there could be a couple of thousand people in that building.
I was assigned to the Oklahoma City Police Tactical Team at the time. And we immediately started working our way towards the building. There were several vehicles on the north side of the building in a parking lot, and all of them were burning. The black smoke was billowing up. When I walked up there, there was a hole in the ground about the size of a swimming pool that looked like about 30 feet in diameter and about 7 or 8 feet deep. Just a big hole in the ground. That's when it started really sinking in. This had to be some kind of bomb.
The 9th floor collapsed on top of the 8th floor, onto the 7th floor. And when all three of those floors came to the 6th floor, the impact threw me into the west wall of the building, face first, and it fractured my skull and left me unconscious there in the rubble.
My office was on the 8th floor, fairly close to the elevators. I came to rather quickly, but I couldn't see anything. My eyes were in pretty bad shape. I could hear groaning, and I felt like I should have done something, and I couldn't. When I first got there, I could see people trapped on different floors, and they needed to be rescued. And so I started my way into the building. I thought to myself, why Oklahoma City? It's a quiet place. Nothing happens here. It's not supposed to happen here.
When I arrived at the scene, it had all of the markings of a bombing. I had worked international terrorism at the FBI headquarters before that, and had worked many cases in the Middle East. It looked almost identical to some of the buildings that had been destroyed in Beirut and places like that.
You know, we'd always had threats. You tell somebody, I'm sorry, but your claim's denied or whatever, and we'd get threats, but not anything that we ever considered, liable.
There has been a massive explosion at a federal building in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. It happened just a short time ago. A large portion of that building has collapsed and fallen away from the rest of the building. At the moment, we don't have any specific numbers on injuries or deaths, but we can tell you that the situation is obviously serious.
I tried to put the building back in my mind of where would he be? If I have to dig for my son, where should I dig? And so that's what I did. I visualized the first floor, the second floor,
The childcare was here, his crib would be here, and that's what I wanted to get to. As I started to climb up the debris and the rubble, I remember a man yelling, "You can't go up there, it's too dangerous." And I remember telling him, our babies are in there. Our babies are in there. I just kept saying, our babies are in there.
When I saw the building for the first time, I just couldn't see how anybody could survive any of that. So at that point, I think my mind was thinking, my kids are gone.
I drove down and met Claudia. We walked up to a perimeter, and I asked the officer, I said, we have two babies in the daycare center. Can I go in? I could see people that are covered with blankets, towels, whatever. They're gone, and I'm praying that one of them is not a small child.
I knew a lot of people in the building. I knew the DEA agents that were in the building. I knew the ATF agents that were in the building. And those people were friends of mine. I could not believe what had happened to all of them and how this could be. How could somebody get to that state in their life where they could be so angry and upset that they would do something like this?
We started the war. Who was the aggressor? That's how I look at the Burr bombing. To me, it wasn't the start of a war, it was a counterattack. The war had already been started. You guys think it can be ruthless? Let's see how you like it when the fight is brought to you. If you continue like moving ready, Wango, this is what's going to happen.
Those last statements right there from Timothy McVeigh's journals, I don't think that was his voice, but from his journals where he's saying, I see it as a counterattack. You started the war. And that's a mentality that's just hard to fully understand. We say you're rational. We know that blowing up buildings isn't the right thing to do. That's what he saw it as. He saw himself as a soldier in a war, undeclared war, not a military war, but he saw himself as a soldier in a movement. And the Murrah bombing was simply part of that war. So apologies for the distraction. I hope it wasn't too distracting. I deal with armored recruiters every now and then. This is so a little bit more about the Swanson family. When my mom hung up with my dad on that day from the call waiting, we did go to the ultrasound and we met with each other at the hospital. And then I distinctly remember one of those weird details. Distinctly remember going to Burger King. I don't even like Burger King. Like to this day, I would not choose to go to a Burger King, but we went to Burger King. And I also remember that my dad said he was going to go back downtown. And as a first grader, I didn't want that to happen because in the interim, there had been a second bomb scare. And the second bomb scare actually has kind of reverberating effects that at the time, maybe everybody didn't really know exactly what it was or how impactful it was going to be. But the second bomb scare took rescuers away from the people they were helping. They were actively trying to dig some out of the rubble, or there's people who are bleeding out, and that first hour really matters to try to get them to the hospital. When the second bomb scare came through, somebody shouted, and you know how it works. When someone shouts it, everybody shouts it. There's another one. There's a second bomb. Get out. And people just started running. People just started leaving where they were, even if it meant leaving victims in the rubble. What the second bomb was is that someone in digging through the rubble saw a munition that belonged to the FBI. The FBI being in the building, they had a training rocket-fired launcher. Okay, it's a military thing, but it's a training, inert, not explosive, rocket-fired missile launcher. And when someone saw that in the rubble, they mistook it for a second bomb. So kind of tragic circumstances is that some people probably died when they could have been saved because of the second bomb threat. Well, my dad said he's going to go back downtown. I didn't want him to, but he did, and there was not a true second bomb, nor was there a third bomb or anything like that. He just went back downtown and started helping out how he could and where he could. And there, I will show you a picture of him or a video of him on that day here in just a second as well. Let's catch up with Timothy McVeigh. So Timothy McVeigh, the primary bomber, the trigger man. Now he was the one in the center photo. The other two were involved with planning, but they were not involved in pulling the trigger on the day of the bomb. That is Timothy McVeigh alone. He was the lone trigger man. He gets into his 1977 Mercury Marquis, and he takes off south towards Norman, Oklahoma. Along the way, he's pulled over by an Oklahoma Highway Patrol officer named Charlie Hanger, and he's pulled over because he doesn't have a license plate on his getaway car. If you're gonna have a getaway car, you probably need to make sure it's legal and intact. He gets pulled over simply because he doesn't have a license plate on his getaway car. He doesn't match there's no description of a bomber. There's no BOLO for this particular vehicle. He's pulled over in a routine traffic stop because he doesn't have a license plate on his vehicle. Dumb number one. Number two, as Charlie Hanger, and this is the dash cam for the police cruiser, as Charlie Hanger comes up, addresses the driver from the window, he notices that Timothy McVeigh has a pistol tucked underneath the passenger seat. He can see the handle grip of this pistol. And he immediately, the officer, draws his weapon, says, "Get your hands where I can see him. I see a pistol in the car. Come out slowly." Timothy McVeigh probably never would have been arrested had he not had a pistol sitting in the front seat. So no tag, probably just would have gotten a ticket. Pistol in the front seat, ends up getting arrested. 49 minutes after the bomb goes off. Or what is that, hour and a half? Look at the timestamp there, 10:30. 90 minutes after the bomb goes off, Timothy McVeigh is in custody. Not because they think he's the bomber, but because he made some stupid mistakes and got himself arrested. Even so, he goes to jail. This is the officer, Charlie Hanger. Timothy McVeigh goes to jail. He's booked 4/19/1995, right? That's the day. But he's not suspected of being the bomber. There's not a description for the bomb. Nobody knows who might have done this yet. But here he is, about 40 miles down the road, 90 minutes later, already in jail. Of course, the problem is they don't associate him with the bombing. So we're going to have to see if he stays in jail. Now, this is the T-shirt he was arrested with. Look at this T-shirt here. We see Abraham Lincoln. And this phrase here, Sic Semper Tyrannis. Anybody know what that means? The significance of that? Close. Who says that phrase? John Wilkes Booth. John Wilkes Booth, and this is something we'll dive into in U.S. history. John Wilkes Booth shoots Abraham Lincoln and yells the phrase, "Sic Semper Tyrannis," which means, "Thus always to tyrants." Or, paraphrase, modern speak, "Snitches get stitches, you get what you get." "Thus always to tyrants" mean, I shot Lincoln because he's a tyrant. Tyrants get what they deserve. Lincoln deserved to die. That's John Wilkes Booth, not David Swanson. Okay, that's John Wilkes Booth's phrasing. So with Timothy McVeigh wearing this T-shirt, Lincoln, "Sic Semper Tyrannis, thus always to tyrants," what do you think he's saying about the government?
They get what they deserve.
The tyrannical, and they get what they deserve. Furthermore, on the back of his T-shirt, this is the same T-shirt, and this is a blow-up. "The tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants." Thomas Jefferson. How do you think he sees himself?
Hero.
He sees himself as a hero. He sees himself as a patriot, and it's emblazoned on his T-shirt right there, right? He sees himself as the good guy. A couple pictures from the time period, okay? I'm going to place ourselves in 903. Timothy McVeigh is in jail, but he's not suspected of being a bomber. Meanwhile, in Oklahoma City, these are some of the images coming from the day. Children involved, children killed and wounded in the daycare center. Firefighters, very heroic on this day. Firefighters showed up, even if they weren't on duty. Those who were involved in firefighting or law enforcement showed up downtown and started helping out any way they could. This is a pretty famous photograph here of a man being coaxed down the ladder truck. He's a little scared, he's scared of the heights, but the firefighter helps him come down from way up high. This is a very powerful photo of a 1-year-old baby named Bailey Allman. She's dead. She's dead in this photograph here, and she's being cradled by this firefighter here. And this is kind of the poignant photo that makes its way around the country to illustrate what happened in Oklahoma City. And obviously, it's harrowing to think that the baby is lifeless, but still the firefighter is cradling her and caring for her in that moment. And again, just the mass of destruction. Every vehicle in the parking lot was destroyed, smoke, cinders, all of that, a lot going on. This is kind of reflective of the second bomb scare. When somebody said there's a second bomb, get out, everybody just started running, to include those who were trying to help, like nurses, firefighters, police officers. Which kind of brings us back to the Swanson family story. So later that night, obviously the search and rescue continues on. And just to kind of add worse to the worst, there was severe weather in Oklahoma on that night. There are actual tornado warnings in Oklahoma City on that very night. So heavy rain, possible tornadoes. Now, there wasn't a tornado right where the building was, but there were tornadoes in Oklahoma City on that night. So just kind of adding to all the chaos is the possible severe weather in the area as well. And that gets us to video number 3. This is gonna be my dad. This is Randy Swanson being interviewed by a local TV station, kind of his experiences of the day. Obviously, a lot of people got interviewed at that time, but this video, my family, we really didn't even know it existed until it showed up kind of like in an online database. So it was like, whoa, Dad, that's you. And that's kind of cool for our family story. Back it up a little bit. Here we go.
About a third of the building has been blown away. This is just devastating.
My back was to my window, and I heard this loud bang, and I initially thought there was a truck getting ready, because the glass was already coming out. I thought a truck was driving in behind me, but I just literally lifted me out of the chair and blew me over my desk onto the floor on the other side of my desk, and then I looked up and see it was plate glass coming out on me, and pictures coming out on me, and I got up and got out. There was a little pandemonium inside the office, went down the hall. Our secretary, scheduler, whatnot, we couldn't find her in her office. Went and pulled the debris away in the chair, and there she was under her desk. She got blown under the desk, I got blown over the desk. I can't tell you about.
So that's his personal story. Just kind of rehashed what I told you a little bit already. Since he worked for the congressman's office, they thought that maybe they were the target, right? I mean, you hear the bomb go off, you don't know the rest of the story. They thought maybe their office was the target, and since his secretary had been opening mail, they actually thought it was a letter bomb. My dad's first impression was, it's a letter bomb. She just opened a letter bomb. Of course, that's not the case. That's not what happened, but that's just kind of part of the chaos of the day. So the first arrests are made about 2 days later, April 21st, and certain people were arrested and questioned as a material witness. Now, this wasn't an arrest of the actual bomber. We actually have Timothy McVeigh in jail about 40 miles south. We just don't know it yet. From these first arrests, we do start to get a description of who the bomber or bombers might have looked like. I distinctly remember as a child these pictures being on the news screen. This was nicknamed, these pictures here were named John Doe number 1 and John Doe number 2. We don't know their names, so we call them John Doe. John Doe number 1, John Doe number 2. In the end, there was no John Doe number 2. This was kind of a false accusation of a particular man who was at the Ryder Truck Agency. But John Doe number 2 actually doesn't exist. John Doe number 1, however, John Doe number 1 looks really similar to Timothy McVeigh. I think they got his sketch pretty close to accurate. This is the arrest of Terry Nichols. Terry Nichols was arrested as a possible co-conspirator, and he was one of the planners, one of Timothy McVeigh's army buddies. This is a very key piece of evidence that ultimately kind of cracks the code on several pieces of the mystery. This is the axle of the Ryder truck. It got blown, how many blocks away? Several blocks away. It got blown from the truck several blocks away. You can see it separated from the vehicle, but it mostly stayed intact by itself. And what remained on the axle of the Ryder truck was the serial number of the Ryder truck. So from this axle, they were able to actually track down the serial number, VIN number of the vehicle, take it back to the specific rental agency, go to that rental agency and see who signed for truck with specific serial number, and this started to put all the pieces of the puzzle together. So that axle is actually on display at the museum today, and it was used in the court. It was used in court. It was actually wheeled out on that dolly just like that. Very important piece of evidence in the whole story overall. John Doe number 1 looks a whole lot like the first two. How'd they do? How'd they do on their sketch? Pretty close, right? Especially if that's just coming from a verbal description. I think the description comes from the guy who rented the truck. Pretty close verbal description to actually give us that picture as well. So now, as this picture circulates, as the John Doe #1 picture circulates, there's some sheriffs in Noble, Oklahoma, okay, about 40 miles south of Oklahoma City, who are like, hey, didn't that guy who got arrested for having no tag on his vehicle, doesn't he look kind of like that? And they realized that in custody, right then, waiting for release, he was literally about to be released because his whole, no tag thing, it really wasn't that big of a deal. They were going to release him. They realized they have the bomber in custody. So he is now charged with the crime of conducting the Oklahoma City bombing, not just having a no tag on his vehicle, but he's now charged in connection with the bombing. And this is the first imagery that the world saw of the bomber. I distinctly remember these pictures coming out, and it's actually a video. It shows him walking, but I distinctly remember this picture and kind of getting a glimpse at the bomber for the first time. And, first grader, and especially considering that my dad was involved and could have been hurt, I saw this as the person who was trying to hurt my dad, and like this is the face